that was fighting for gay rights, and people were killed.
Nobody was killed at Stonewall.
Nobody was killed.
All Stars 10 has just finished airing. Listen, if you've been following the online reactions over the past couple months, then you know how divided people have been, especially in regards to some of the decisions we saw play out, from the judges panel to the challenges that were put into some of the brackets. Although, even with its negatives, the overall package we got with All Stars 10 has a lot more things about it that they did do right. It's just, what exactly do we take from this season? When it was first announced that All Stars 10 had a new format that would be introduced, it was exciting. All Stars 9 just wasn't a very entertaining addition, largely because it proved that once you remove the actual competition aspect from the series, it leaves you with a set of 12 episodes where, while it did have highlights, the lack of stakes made it for a pretty dull season to watch through. The concept of All Stars 10 introducing the tournament format, where 18 queens were placed into 3 brackets of 6 queens each, brought forward a lot of questions. If each bracket had 3 episodes, what would this mean for the airing? Would the first 3 episodes to air be the first respective premieres of each bracket, with pretty much every week we'd be catching up with each of them? Or would they do what they actually ended up doing, which was to air it the same way it was filmed, with all of the orange bracket airing first, the pink bracket, and then the purple bracket? Well, let's get into it, but before we start, do you ever have those moments when you realize that your life is not the way you expected it to be? When I was like 18, I pictured my early 20s as this confident, sorted out era where I'd be thriving, professionally killing it, mentally unbothered, and just living. Instead, I'm navigating career changes, dealing with uncertainty, and of course, spiraling about it at like 2 a.m. I've actually done all sorts of therapy even throughout my late teens, and for a long time, it didn't click to me just how helpful it all really was for my mental health development. The truth is, you don't have to hit rock bottom to get support. You can just be a regular person trying to figure things out, and that's still valid. You probably heard all the stigma about how it's hard to find the right person to be vulnerable with. All of it can feel like a lot at first glance. That's where today's paid partner, BetterHelp, made it easy for me to even consider talking to someone again in the first place. A therapist isn't there to judge or fix you. They're there to listen, ask questions, and help you see things from a different angle. Sometimes all you need is a new perspective and someone who knows what they're talking about to start making real changes. BetterHelp is on a mission to make starting therapy less scary and more convenient. You just fill out a quick questionnaire and they'll match you with a credentialed therapist who fits your needs. And if it's not clicking, you can switch therapists anytime for free. No weird guilt and no awkwardness. They've got over 7,000 reviews and a 4.3 rating on Trustpilot. So it's not just me saying this. People really do trust the platform. And I, for one, am super grateful for the opportunity to be able to offer this to all of you who support my channel. So if you've been thinking about therapy or even are just curious about it, click the link in the description to get 10% off your first month. Now let's begin. Leading up to All Stars 10 episode 1, there was a considerable degree of hype, because I think whether you were someone that went on to like or dislike this format, the degree of curiosity over how it would look and play out on the final edits of the episode really added to the viewing experience early on. First, let's start with the orange bracket, comprised of Aja, Irene the Alien, Olivia Lux, Deja Skye, Phoenix, and Bosco. This bracket probably had the most amount of pressure out of the 3, because they were the guinea pigs, both for how viewers would be introduced to the new format and for how producers would be able to see it all play out on camera. This group was pretty competitive. We see as soon as they walk into the workroom how queens like Aja, Deja, and Olivia try to align themselves with each other. Mind you, Aja was trying to make sure that both Deja and Olivia would prioritize her as an ally, but that quickly went down the drain. Out of all 6 queens, Aja and Bosco were probably the best when it came to the sheer experience of being a reality TV character. They were bringing personality that added so much energy to the room, allowing other contestants like Irene or Olivia to play into it too. Then we had sort of the wild cards, like Phoenix or Deja Skye. Now, Phoenix probably was the odd one out from the whole All Stars 10 cast, just for the fact that not only was the only time she competed season 3, which aired 14 years ago, she only actually lasted like 2 episodes before getting eliminated, and isn't a name that anyone particularly remembered or talked about in general. Well, realistically, I had low expectations for her given how she lacks a lot of experience, and and on her season she failed to properly showcase her personality, there's always that unpredictable factor where I hope for a queen that is vastly underestimated to be able to surprise people. In her case though, she did meet people's expectations. In the case of Deja Skye, her run on the 3-episode bracket was actually a really good step up from what we saw her first time around. On season 14, Deja Skye was actually one of the queens that caught my attention in the beginning of the season. Particularly her personality was one that seemed to have a lot of potential when it came to being a comedic queen. Unfortunately, season 14 was sort of a mess in general, so it was hard to properly appreciate a lot of the queens with all the twists and turns that were going on. Deja's return also came with a new dive into her as a person, like her sharing about her decision to get an operation to have dozens of pounds shaved off her body that resulted in her almost dying from the recovery process. Regardless, she survived, and with it, we got to see a much happier and vibrant Deja. So then, here we had the cast of the Orange Bracket. Yet, how exactly were things gonna turn out? The first challenge, they had to come up with their own verse for a rock-themed performance. All of them did a pretty good job. If anything, the top 3 for the episode was pretty fair, with Aja, Bosco, and Irene landing in the top. The best by far was Irene. What made her segment so significant was the layers attached to the lyrics she wrote, paying reference to the fact that she was the first eliminated queen of season 15, and that people needed to remember her name. And honestly, seeing her do good right at the premiere episode is something that you know she had been waiting for a long time to happen. And us as viewers too, since most of the audience wished that she had been able to survive the first elimination on season 15, given that she provided a good personality when it came to having conflict with other queens in the room. Regardless, she ended up being in the top 2 alongside Aja. Aja was actually also in the top 2 for the All-Stars 3 premiere. To see her perform and obliterate a lip sync after more than 7 years since she was last on the show made me sort of emotional. If you didn't know, I actually did an interview with Aja about 8 months before she got the call to be on All-Stars 10, which I strongly urge you to watch. Regardless, the first episode of All-Stars 10 set things up great. The concept of each member in the top 2 earning 2 points each, the winner getting an extra point, and then the added twist that each queen in the bottom 4 would have 1 point that they could give to whichever queen they wanted, made for a great refresher in terms of what to expect from the competition moving forward. Which brings us to episode 2. It's here that we see the extra 4 points twist actually play out, resulting in all of the queens just handing one to each other, with all of them ending up with 1 point each. This was actually not that bad from a viewer experience, because there was still a novelty to the concept of what this game was, but it would quickly grow stale by the time we got to the third bracket, but we'll get to that in just a second. It was pretty impressive to see how good most of the queens did in the improv challenge. It felt super campy, and I fully thought that maybe they were handed a script at times to read off of something. However, it was entirely that. I've seen online that they all just came up with little gimmicks for their character that added a lot of value to the challenge in itself. Irene, though, dominated hard, which was important for her stance as a Drag Race contestant. Because yes, she did win the first challenge, but she was also the first queen eliminated from season 15. So she needed to prove not just that she was able to succeed in the competition, but also show that it wasn't just luck that she won the first week. And so she landed in the top 2 for the second week in a row. And it was hard not to be okay with the outcome because it seemed very fair. All that being said, just like she was outshined the first week by Aja in the lip sync, Bosco, who landed in the top 2 with her, absolutely obliterated Irene back to planet Mars. By this point, it became clear that the front runners of the Orange Bracket were Irene, Bosco, and Aja, with Phoenix, Deja, and Olivia being the only ones who were yet to be in the top 2. That actually ends up translating at the beginning of episode 3, where the bottom 4 hand each other their point. But despite Olivia and Aja having an agreement that they would be prioritizing each other in the competition, and Aja handing off her point to Olivia, Olivia decides to hand her point to Deja, arguing that she still supports Aja, but it felt it was more fair to help level the playing field for everyone. This was a really fun way of seeing the drama that was being caused by the point system. Queens didn't want to risk allowing their alliance to get in the way of making them fall even further behind. So to see Olivia have to backtrack on her alliance with Aja was great TV. And honestly, it started heating up things from the perspective of viewers at home, especially considering we knew there was additional groups of queens yet to enter the playing field. Once we get to the end of the third episode, it's the moment of truce. Bosco and Irene are in the top 2, making them instantly qualified to the semifinal, while Aja, Deja, Olivia, and Phoenix are forced to reveal their final votes on the main stage. I would actually prefer if next season they have the queens reveal their points at the end of each episode, rather than waiting for the beginning of the next episode to know. It would heighten the tension of the episodes, and there would still be drama in the sneak peek for the new episodes because it'll show the fallouts that stem from how queens decided to vote. Regardless, it's here that Aja almost gets voted out of the top 3, but shockingly, thanks to Olivia deciding to give her vote to Aja and Phoenix doing the same, Aja becomes the 3rd queen alongside Bosco and Irene to qualify for the semifinals. Needless to say, Orange Bracket left a pretty good impression to us as viewers, after carrying a pretty heavy weight. The only question was, how would the other brackets do now that it was their turn? Well, that brings us to the pink bracket, comprised of Tina Burner, Mistress Isabel Brooks, Nicole Paige Brooks, Jorgeous, Lydia B. Collins, and Carrie Colby. Automatically, it goes without saying that this was by far the best bracket in terms of sheer entertainment that we got out of it. Everything just fell into place so well. For starters, even the fact that Maddie Morphosis was originally intended to be a part of the cast, only for her to drop out last minute and be replaced with Lydia B. Collins, actually made the dynamics of the group skyrocket in quality. What's more is that even Mistress, who everyone knew to keep an eye on, came into her episodes with a clear plan on causing as much chaos as possible. Now listen, some of you are going to be thinking, well, obviously Mistress was going to give us drama, which yes, I agree, but I do think that there was a risk that she would end up wanting to lay low given that she was at the mercy of other queens when it came to the possibilities of having a high enough score to qualify to the semifinal. Bracket 2, episode 1 brought forth a sewing challenge. Apparently, this was a challenge that was added in last minute. Right after Maddie Morphosis, who was originally supposed to be in the pink bracket, ended up dropping out last minute and was replaced with Lydia B. Collins, it seems that they sort of wanted to throw Lydia a bone by having one of the 3 episodes not have a runway that they'd need to bring from home, given that she only had about a week to prepare for it. Overall though, the top 3 for this week ends up being Mistress, Lydia, and Tina Burner, and the top 2 ends up being Lydia and Tina, leaving Mistress super gagged that she wouldn't be able to perform the song, because coincidentally, Love Sensation is her signature choice when she's on tour. It created such a juicy moment and the setup for a perfect storm that would unfold when they returned to the workroom. Essentially though, the biggest winner of the first week was Lydia B. Collins, who was the freshest queen out of all 6 of them. And given that nobody knew about her at this point since season 17 hadn't yet aired, she was for sure now viewed as a clear threat in the competition. On episode 2 is when one of the biggest betrayals in history would happen, when Mistress orchestrated the stealing of Nicole and Carrie's points, allowing her and Jorgeous to have 2 points each. And Nicole and Carrie, having been bamboozled, were left with 0 points. This was straight up one of the best moments of the entire season. It went crazy viral, and rightfully so. It was sort of insane what Mistress managed to pull here. I mean, Nicole sort of clocked it at the beginning when she said that she'd rather just give her point to Carrie because she felt Mistress wasn't gonna give her the point back. But for some reason, not only does Nicole go ahead and give her point to Mistress, it's then that Mistress commands Carrie to give her point to Jorgeous, even though Mistress should have just given her point to Nicole right then and there. Regardless, Carrie does as she was told and gives her point to Jorgeous. Mistress then gives her point to Jorgeous instead of Nicole and commands Jorgeous to give her point to Mistress. And she does, leaving Nicole and Carrie in pure shock. Going forward, it was even more exciting from a viewer's perspective because things were now going to be super chaotic. Nobody trusted Mistress or Jorgeous. And moreover, we had storylines like Tina Burner being completely annoyed by Mistress, while at the same time hoping Lydia would be able to be someone she could rely on, which ends up not being the case at all, since Lydia ends up being adopted by Mistress as her drag daughter. It was a little random when on episode 1, Lydia had decided to create the storyline of her wanting to be MIB's drag daughter, especially since neither of them had met prior to filming. If anything, Mistress sort of viewed it as a fun opportunity that it ended up turning into a full-fledged thing even outside of the show. To this day, them now having a good relationship with each other. Regardless, it sort of set up this indirect alliance between them. The episode 2 Rapping Rose challenge was another great moment from the season. I actually think this is a challenge that they should try to incorporate into more editions going forward because it was a good way to transform what could have been a reading challenge into something more grand. Plus, everyone did a pretty good job respectively, except for Carrie Colby that had like 1 or 2 reads in her lyrics, but most of it was just her singing about whatever was on her mind that day. The episode ends in Jorgeous and Mistress being the top 2, and weirdly, even though most of the audience thought that Jorgeous had clearly won the lip sync, it resulted in a tie, with each of them having to share 0.5 points each. That would go on to be the saving grace for Mistress at the very end, but we'll get to that in a second. By episode 3, the voting ceremony results in Nicole giving her point to Carrie, Carrie giving her point to Lydia, Tina giving her point to Nicole, and Lydia who ends up giving her point to Carrie instead of Tina, which shocks Tina, because according to her, the four of them had agreed that they would play it fair and give each other a point. Instead, Lydia uses this as an opportunity to get 1 point ahead of Tina and stop her from progressing in the scoreboard, to which Tina automatically calls out as her being strategic. For some reason though, Lydia doesn't just own the fact that she was playing the game and tries to simply say that it wasn't meant to be taken that way at all. Yet in the confessional, she straight up says that she did it because she didn't want Tina to catch up to her points-wise. In the first workroom moment they have out of drag, Mistress tries to gaslight Carrie and Nicole to say that Tina tried getting Lydia to team up and steal their points just like Mistress and Jorgeous had done to them. Weirdly though, even though this was clearly Mistress trolling, Carrie starts to play into it, questioning Tina if this was true, and that she somewhat was considering believing what Mistress was saying, this being the same individual that had betrayed Carrie just 2 days prior. Regardless, the final challenge they do is the Heroes vs. Villains musical, where 3 of them would play heroes and the other 3 would play villains. It's here yet again that Mistress manifests on camera the degree of power that she had over the other contestants. When it came time to picking the roles, there was a lot of back and forth. Ultimately, Mistress takes control and starts assigning roles to the queens for how she wants the show to go, and everyone else just sort of agree and do what they're told. Like once again, Mistress ended up having things go her way, ending up in the villains group next to Lydia and Jorgeous. This musical was super fun and catchy and really well produced. Like if anyone was doubting All Stars 10, this was solidifying their position as one of the best additions of the franchise. This was solidifying their position as one of the best additions of the franchise in a while. At least, that's what we thought for now. At the end of the episode, Rue announces the top 2 as Jorgeous and Lydia, making each of them qualify to the semifinals. In this lip sync, apparently Lydia, who revealed into a wig, had the second wig end up falling off her head completely and had to pick it up and put it on again. Yet, this was edited out of the final cut of the episode, which is weird because Lydia ends up losing the lip sync anyway. So it was like, why not just include that, especially since it would continue the storyline of the season 17 curse where a bunch of the queens kept having their wigs fall off their head in the middle of the lip sync. The final point ceremony was the most nail biting of the season. Nicole and Tina end up conspiring to kick Mistress out of the finals by deciding to give their point to Carrie Colby, assuming that Mistress would stay true to her word and give her point to Carrie too, making Carrie qualify to the semifinals over her. Yet in a last minute twist, Carrie ends up voting for Tina, and Mistress badmouths Carrie in front of the judges and reveals that she sent her point to Lydia, making Mistress be the 3rd queen to qualify from the bracket, with just 0.5 points ahead of Carrie Colby. Needless to say, the pink bracket was one of the most highly rated episodes of the season by the fanbase. We were now 6 episodes into the season, and it was turning out to be one of the greatest all-stars in a good while. And that's when bracket 3 happened. Bracket 3 was comprised of Cynthia Lee Fontaine, Ginger Minj, Acid Betty, Denali, Daya Betty, and Alyssa Hunter. Already based on the cast itself, the purple bracket was the least hyped by a long slide. It wasn't necessarily a slight at the queens, but more so about what we could expect from the competition standpoint. The other brackets seemed to have a really good mix that made sense, but the purple bracket just looked like the leftovers that were grouped together last minute. Regardless, even though it seemed the least exciting, it could have subverted expectation. After all, the format of giving each other points really was resulting in some good television. Yet things ended up going downhill really fast. Bracket 3 episode 1 starts off with the sewing challenge, where the queens had to get into pairs and not just create an outfit, but also come up with a storyline that would be based on a good queen versus evil queen. When we saw the 3 pairs do their presentations, most of the fan base felt that Acid Betty and Denali were the clear winners. Not only did they look amazing, but their story was actually really well presented and clever. Weirdly enough though, they ended up giving the win to Ginger Minj and Daya Betty, with Ginger winning the lip sync. It was especially weird since at this point, point, considering that production knew that the next 2 episodes would be comedy challenges that Ginger would most likely do well in, that they decided to place her in the top for episode 1 when it didn't seem like she earned it. What's more is that episode 1 should have just been a sewing/design challenge with no comedy aspect at all. It was like they were tailoring it a little bit for there to be more of a chance for someone that didn't know how to sew to still rise to the occasion. Regardless, going into episode 2, the point ceremony results in the 4 bottom queens all giving their partner a point, leaving them all with 1 point each. This was of course no surprise. If anything, it made you appreciate Mistress a lot more for what went down on bracket 2, because to steal someone's point was ballsy, and clearly nobody else this season even attempted to do so. It did, however, now give us a comparison sheet. Purple bracket didn't set any standard. It was instead compared to what we saw in the orange bracket and pink bracket, and it wasn't living up to them at all, resulting in a huge drop when it came to the entertainment factor. You just sort of didn't care how things were going to turn out. The second challenge involved the queens having to make a country themed verse. Cynthia Lee Fontaine actually surprises everyone because her and Denali were easily the most catchy ones out of all 6 queens, along with witty lyrics and a good voice. Unfortunately, the top 2 ends up being Ginger Minj again with Denali. They lip sync to See You Again by Miley Cyrus, and it results in a controversial decision with Ruth saying Ginger won the lip sync, even though most people thought Denali should have been given the win. While I do think Denali was doing a little bit too much, they should have just given her this win, since it ends up making Ginger's run going forward have a sour taste to it. I mean, I don't see why they wouldn't have given Denali the win anyway. It's not like Ginger would have been in a bad position because of it. And considering they knew the following week was an improv challenge, there wasn't that big of a danger of her to flop. Regardless, here's where things get slightly interesting. At the beginning of episode 3, Acid Betty starts to create her own strategy where she decides she wants to push Cynthia Lee Fontaine to the final, and even tries to get some of the other queens to join in on it. Once the point ceremony starts, Cynthia gives her points to Daya Betty. Daya gives her point to Cynthia. Alyssa Hunter gives her point to Cynthia, and Acid gives her point to Cynthia, resulting in Cynthia having a total of 4 points, being the 3rd highest ranked queen out of all 6 of them. What made this cool was that it was sort of like Acid giving up her spot. It's like she realized she probably wasn't going to be making it through, especially since on episode 1 she wasn't even considered for the top 2 placement. And after that, the writing was sort of on the wall. While this wasn't the most entertaining of challenges, Ginger Minj actually does good. Denali did a decent job as well, but Acid Betty actually brought a really fun point of view when it came to how she approached her character. Yet when the moment of truth came, Rue announces the top 2 is Ginger Minj and Daya Betty, automatically qualifying them to the semifinals. In the final point ceremony, Cynthia gives her point to Alyssa, Denali gives her point to Acid, Alyssa gives her point to Denali, and Acid, who now had to break the tie, votes for Cynthia, making Cynthia be the 3rd to qualify to the semifinals, just 1 point ahead of Denali. Bracket 3, aka Purple Bracket, goes on to be the worst received the whole season. In fact, look at these polls I made right after each of the brackets finished airing. As you can see, the first 6 episodes had largely good reviews, but it's Bracket 3 that most people really disliked, and rightfully so. It wasn't just that it was predictable who would be the frontrunners, but it was also a very boring watch, with the few dramatic moments being very underwhelming. Yet that didn't mean that things were done for good. We were now 9 episodes in, and the next 3 episodes would be the merge, where the top 3 from each respective bracket would come together and compete for the crown. On All Stars 10 episode 10, we now get to the first episode of the merge. Okay, listen, while bracket 3 may have been a letdown, even just with the preview of the merge, it reignited the flame I had for the season. And clearly, a lot of people online agreed. It quite literally looked like such a stacked cast now comprised of 9 queens. Irene the Alien, Bosco, Aja, Mistress Isabel Brooks, Jorgeous, Lydia B. Collins, Ginger Minj, Daya Betty, and Cynthia Lee Fontaine. Off the bat, Mistress managed to make it once again her show, when she starts to zone in on Ginger Minj as her new target. Which made sense given that going into this, Ginger was the one to watch out for, considering she did so well in her bracket. The first challenge for the merge was the Snatch Game, and the girls had plenty of time to prepare for this. Yet it was sort of a rough showcase. most of them didn't necessarily do amazing. I mean, Jorgeous was a nice surprise, but even then, she was clearly second best, with Ginger having bulldozed through all the other queens. She was just really funny to watch, and she ends up winning the challenge, with the bottom two being Mistress Isabelle Brooks and Cynthia Lee Fontaine. That ends in Mistress winning the lip sync and Cynthia becoming the first queen from the merge to get eliminated and sent home. On episode 2, it starts off with Mistress being very clearly bothered by the way things were going. The queens ask her how she's feeling, and she's very short with her answers, even congratulating Ginger and saying that she wants Ginger to go ahead and win the whole thing. Which was crazy that it even made the final edit, since it was clearly MIB calling out production. Things got worse when the queens enter the workroom the next day, and Mistress has that confrontation with Aja where it somewhat gets physical when she touches Aja's hair to push it aside and laugh into her ear. Mistress has said that looking back she did cross the line when she did that, but nevertheless, seeing all the queens in the room get uncomfortable and just the overall gall MIB had to even do that resulted in yet again one of the most talked about scenes from All Stars 10 as a whole. This episode was the talent show, and we got to see some really cool showcases. Aja did good, Bosco goes on to win, Jorgeous does her best talent show to date, and Ginger also eats it up. The only ones that were a letdown were Lydia B. Collins, who was literally falling apart as she was performing hers, and Mistress that didn't get a lot of laughs, resulting in her and Lydia being the bottom two for the episode. This was actually a really nail-biting moment, since you know how bad each of the two of them wanted it. And MIB had talked so much crap going into the merge that when you saw them lip-syncing, they were literally fighting for their lives. Ultimately, Lydia B. Collins gets to stay, and Mistress Isabelle Brooks is eliminated and sent home by her own drag daughter. Mistress has said that when she was preparing for the merge, she largely focused on perfecting her performance style and what she would do in the lip sync for the crown. She didn't necessarily know that there would be 2 eliminations before the finale, so she didn't prepare as much for Snatch Game or the talent show, since ultimately what mattered the most was how she'd end up doing in the lip syncs. It's sort of a shame that the random eliminated queen that got to return ends up being Carrie Colby. I mean, it just seemed so out of left field that both T.S. Madison and Michelle Visage picked Carrie out of more than 6 queens that they could have chosen from, and Ross was the only one to pick Mistress. But regardless, if Mistress had returned, we would have gotten to see a lot more gaggy dance moves that she had been saving for the finale, including cartwheels and who knows what else. It was also clear that the moment Carrie stepped into the workroom, nobody viewed her as a threat. Plus, given that she was the first queen to go home in her first lip sync, it made her coming back entirely pointless. When it came to the lip sync for the crown, some of the highlights included Bosco doing her burlesque, which was entrancing to see, but also this was clearly Jorgeous' episode. Every single one of her lip syncs were so entertaining to watch. You could see the fire within her, and honestly, it was sort of emotional how much she had grown as a performer over their years of the franchise. Ultimately, the top 2 ends up being Ginger Minj and Jorgeous, with Ginger being announced as the winner of the whole thing. The aftermath of the finale resulted in most of the fan base being upset about how things turned out. Jorgeous was the fan favorite out of the two, and she had done such a good job with all her lip syncs that it felt deserving to crown her. Nevertheless, Ginger had done a good job on the season too. Unfortunately, production overdid it at times with how they set things up, especially during her bracket. If they had been able to not make Ginger as much of a quote unstoppable force, literally the moment she walked to her screens, maybe it wouldn't have been beaten over people's heads as much. Regardless, I don't mind that Ginger won. Would I have loved it if Jorgeous won? Well, yes, because she did amazing. But ultimately, Ginger also did amazing this season. It's just that an unfortunate set of events will result in her being the least liked by fans out of the two. And I do have to say that no matter what, while All Stars 10 may have had some flaws towards the second half of the season, it overall was entertaining and kept me wanting to tune in every week to see what would happen. I have a question for you all though. What would you rate All Stars 10 out of 10? And would you like to see the format used next season? Let me know in the comments, and give this video a quick like to help me out with the algorithm. Thanks again to BetterHelp for being the paid partner of today's video. Make sure to click the link in the description to get 10% off your first month and support the channel in the process.